It started with an anonymous letter, a crudely drawn happy face at the bottom of the page. The author boasted about getting away with murder, detailing crimes the police hadn't even connected yet. At first, authorities didn't believe him. False confessions happen all the time. But soon, the horrifying truth emerged. A long-haul truck driver had been killing women across the country, leaving no trace behind. His name was Keith Hunter Jesperson. For 5 years, he murdered in the shadows, preying on women he met along lonely highways. When someone else was wrongly convicted for one of his crimes, Jesperson couldn't resist the urge to take credit. And so, the happy face letters began, taunting police, mocking investigators, and giving just enough detail to prove he was telling the truth. He would eventually confess to 8 murders, but before his arrest, he made an even more sinister claim, that he had killed over 160 people, a claim that, to this day, remains a terrifying mystery. Now, as Paramount Plus prepares to release a dramatic retelling of his story, starring Dennis Quaid, it's time to revisit one of the most disturbing serial killer cases in modern history. How did Jesperson go undetected for so long? Was he really responsible for more than 8 deaths? And what finally led to his capture? This is the story of the Happy Face Killer. Keith Hunter Jesperson was born on April 6, 1955, in Chilliwack, British Columbia, Canada. His childhood was far from normal. He was raised in a strict working-class family with his parents and 4 siblings. His father, Les Jesperson, was an alcoholic with a violent temper. From an early age, Keith was subjected to severe physical abuse. His father beat him regularly, often for minor infractions. His older brothers bullied him relentlessly, and his mother rarely intervened. Keith was much larger than most children his age, which made him stand out in school, but instead of making him respected, it made him a target. Jesperson later described his early years as filled with anger, loneliness, and a growing desire for control. He had few friends and was often excluded from social activities. As he got older, his dark thoughts began to manifest in disturbing ways. By the time he was 5 years old, he had already begun torturing small animals. It started with stray cats and dogs, which he would tie up and harm in secret. He later admitted that he would sometimes strap animals to train tracks and watch as they were killed. These violent tendencies escalated over time. His father did nothing to stop him. In fact, some reports suggest that Les Jesperson encouraged his son's violent behavior, teaching him that dominance and cruelty were signs of strength. Jesperson absorbed this lesson early, shaping his understanding of power and control. Despite his disturbing behavior, Jesperson managed to stay out of serious trouble. His violent outbursts were frequent, but he knew how to keep them hidden. Teachers noticed that he was socially withdrawn and difficult to manage, but there was little intervention. At 14, he made his first known attempt at murder. During an argument with a younger boy, Jesperson brutally beat him and attempted to drown him in a river. The attack was interrupted by an adult, and the boy survived. Jesperson later admitted that his intention was to kill, but since he was stopped, he never got the chance. Even with these violent tendencies, Jesperson was able to maintain the appearance of normalcy. He continued through school, eventually graduating, and at 20 years old, he followed in his father's footsteps and became a long-haul truck driver. For the next decade, he lived what appeared to be an ordinary life. He got married, had 3 children, and kept a steady job. But underneath it all, his violent urges never left him. By the late 1980s, Keith Jesperson was ready to kill. The first murder. On January 23, 1990, Keith Jesperson committed his first known murder. His victim was Tonja Bennett, a 23-year-old woman from Portland, Oregon. That night, Jesperson had stopped at a bar when he met Bennett. She was outgoing, talkative, and eager for company. To the people around her, she was just another young woman enjoying a night out. But to Jesperson, she was an opportunity. He lured Bennett back to his rental home, offering drinks and conversation. But once they were alone, things took a dark turn. According to Jesperson's later confession, an argument broke out between them. When she insulted him, something inside him snapped. He brutally beat her before strangling her to death with his bare hands. Jesperson had fantasized about killing for years, but now the fantasy had become real. For a brief moment, he felt a rush of power, but that quickly turned to panic. He had a dead body in his home and no plan for how to dispose of it. In a desperate attempt to cover his tracks, he wrapped Bennett's body in a blue tarp, loaded her into his car, and drove toward the Columbia River Gorge. He found a secluded area off the highway and dumped her remains, believing that no one would ever find her. At first, it seemed like he had gotten away with it, but then something unexpected happened. A woman named Laverne Pavlinak, desperate to escape her abusive relationship, falsely confessed to Bennett's murder. She claimed that her boyfriend, John Sosnovsky, had forced her to help kill Tanya. Her story was inconsistent, but she provided enough vague details that police believed her. Eager to close the case, authorities convicted Pavlinak and Sosnovsky. She was sentenced to 10 years in prison, and he was given life behind bars. Jesperson, the real killer, watched the trial unfold with a mixture of amusement and frustration. On one hand, he had gotten away with murder. On the other hand, he wanted recognition for what he had done. So, he decided to send his first letter. He wrote an anonymous confession detailing the true story of Bennett's murder. To prove his authenticity, he included information that had not been released to the public. And at the bottom of the letter, he signed it with a simple, mocking symbol, a happy face. The police, convinced they had already solved the case, ignored his letter. But for Jesperson, it was only the beginning. He had a dark realization. He could kill again. The killing spree. With his first murder behind him, and 2 innocent people taking the fall, Keith Jesperson felt untouchable. He had gotten away with it once, and now he had the freedom to do it again. Over the next 5 years, Jesperson traveled across the country as a long-haul trucker, using his job as the perfect cover. His victims were women he met along highways, often sex workers, runaways, or women who were down on their luck. These were people who wouldn't be reported missing right away, and even if they were, few would go looking for them. Jesperson's second victim was an unidentified woman he claimed was named Claudia, a woman he picked up in California. Just like before, he strangled her to death, then dumped her body in a remote location. Jesperson didn't have a strict pattern, and that's what made him so difficult to catch. He killed in different states, used different methods of disposal, and made sure there was no direct connection between him and his victims. Some bodies were left on the side of the road. Others were dumped in rivers. In one case, he tied a woman underneath his truck and dragged her for miles, ensuring she would never be identified. Suzanne Kellenberg was found in Florida, while another, Lori Ann Pentland, was discovered in Oregon. His killings stretched from California to Wyoming, Nebraska to Washington, and beyond. For Jesperson, murder became an addiction. He later described the feeling of taking a life as a rush, an almost euphoric experience. But unlike most serial killers, he didn't just want to kill, he wanted people to know he was out there. He continued sending letters to newspapers, detailing his crimes. The smiley face became his signature, a taunting symbol that mocked both the police and the public. At one point, he even called 911, hoping to leave an anonymous tip about one of his own murders. But when he realized the call was being traced, he quickly hung up. The killing spree went on for years. By 1995, he had murdered at least 8 women, possibly more, but he was about to make his biggest mistake. The final murder and capture. By early 1995, Keith Jesperson believed he was unstoppable. He had killed across multiple states without leaving a clear trail, taunted police with letters, and avoided capture at every turn. But his ego would ultimately be his downfall. His last known victim was Julie Ann Winningham, a woman he had been dating for several weeks. Unlike his previous victims, Julie wasn't a stranger. She was someone who actually knew Jesperson. At first, their relationship seemed normal. Jesperson even introduced her to friends. But behind closed doors, things weren't going well. Julie started talking about breaking up. She had grown tired of his mood swings and controlling behavior. Jesperson couldn't let that happen. On March 10th, 1995, he strangled Julianne Winningham in his truck. But this time, there was a problem. People knew they had been together. She had mentioned him to friends and family. Unlike his previous victims, Julie's disappearance wouldn't go unnoticed. Her body was discovered near Washougal, Washington. When police began investigating, all signs pointed to Jesperson. He panicked. He knew it was only a matter of time before authorities caught up with him. So, for the first time, he considered turning himself in. Jesperson called his brother and confessed to everything, detailing multiple murders across the country. His brother urged him to go to the police. Days later, Jesperson wrote a letter to his children, apologizing for what he had done. Then, on March 30th, 1995, Jesperson walked into a police station in Oregon and confessed to killing Julianne Winningham. But once he started talking, he didn't stop. Over the next several days, he described at least 8 murders in chilling detail. He showed no remorse, speaking casually about how he picked up victims and ended their lives. But when police pressed him about the true number of victims, Jesperson made a horrifying claim. He said he had killed more than 160 people. To this day, investigators have never been able to prove that number. Was he exaggerating? Or are there still countless victims out there, lost to the highways he once roamed? The sentencing and the aftermath. Once Keith Jesperson was in custody, investigators worked to verify his claims. While some of the murders he described matched open cases, many of the 160 killings he boasted about had no supporting evidence. Authorities suspected he was exaggerating, either to inflate his own notoriety or to confuse investigators. In the end, Jesperson was only officially linked to 8 murders, though some believe the true number could be higher. Jesperson initially pleaded not guilty to the murder of Julianne Winningham, but as the case against him grew stronger, he changed his plea to guilty to avoid the death penalty. Between 1995 and 1997, he was convicted of multiple counts of murder in Oregon, Washington, and Wyoming. He was sentenced to multiple life terms without the possibility of parole. While in prison, Jesperson remained disturbingly open about his crimes. He continued to boast about them, showing little remorse. His confessions helped exonerate Laverne Pavlinak and John Sosnowski, who had been wrongly convicted of Tonya Bennett's murder. After spending 5 years behind bars for a crime they didn't commit, they were finally released. Jesperson's case also raised a disturbing question. How many other innocent people were sitting in prison for crimes they didn't commit while the real killers walked free? Today, Jesperson is incarcerated at the Oregon State Penitentiary. At 68 years old, he still insists he killed far more than 8 people, though no additional victims have been confirmed. Whether he was a pathological liar or a serial killer with far more blood on his hands remains an open question. Unanswered questions. Keith Jesperson is one of the most disturbed serial killers in modern history, not just because of the murders he committed, but because of how easily he went unnoticed. For 5 years he roamed the highways, using his job as a long-haul trucker to hunt for victims. His ability to blend in allowed him to escape suspicion, even as bodies turned up in multiple states. Unlike many serial killers, Jesperson didn't crave secrecy. He wanted recognition. The taunting letters, the confessions, and the happy face signature were all part of his need to be known, to be feared. But his arrogance also led to his downfall. His final victim, Julianne Winningham, was someone people knew he was involved with. Her murder set off an investigation that finally ended his killing spree. Even with Jesperson behind bars, his story continues to fascinate and disturb. Now, Paramount Plus is bringing his case to life in a brand new dramatic series starring Dennis Quaid. The series will explore the mind of a man who killed without remorse, and how his crimes shocked investigators across the country. But one mystery remains. Was Jesperson telling the truth about his so-called 160 victims? Were there others lost to the highways he once traveled? Or was this just another game, another lie from a man who spent his life seeking control? One thing is certain, his reign of terror ended with a simple, haunting signature, a happy face.
Why did you do them?
I will come with a full confession on every victim that I have taken care of.